you ever wondered what would have happened if Gojo was reborn with all his memories? Could he save his best friend Geto from breaking bad this time? And most importantly, could he finally defeat the King of Curses? Starting from his birth, we know that Gojo, being the first person in almost 400 years to inherit both the Limitless and the Six Eyes, quite literally shifted the balance of power in the world. I mean, a bounty worth over 100 million was put on his head. And honestly, even as a kid, Gojo was already him enough to handle any bounty hunters that came after him, sometimes with nothing but his aura alone. So even if he has all his memories, this part of his life wouldn't change much. That said, there is one specific moment where things could get spicy. When Toji appears to check him out, Gojo would actually try to piss him off. You see, in the main story, this scene is basically Toji getting mogged because for the first time in his life, someone becomes aware of his presence as he stands behind them, and Gojo simply doesn't care. At that point, Gojo likely hadn't even heard of Toji, but this version of Gojo knows exactly who he is, and hates him. So he'd definitely try to aura farm in a way that messes with Toji on purpose. Still, as I said, for the most part, Gojo's childhood doesn't change much. And just like Gege mentioned in a Q&A, the clan takes Gojo away from his parents since they can't be involved in his education as a Jujutsu sorcerer. Though, honestly, what kind of education does he even need? He already knows everything there is to know thanks to his memories. Like, let's talk about the hidden inventory arc for a second. How's anything supposed to be a problem if Gojo already knows exactly what's coming? To understand how much this changes things, let's quickly go over what originally happens. Gojo's a second-year student, and alongside Suguro Geto, he's tasked with protecting Riko Amanai, the Star Plasma Vessel, until she can merge with Tengen. But many are after her, like the Time Vessel Association cult and the mercenary group Q. And as Gojo and Geto only realize when it's already too late, Toji Fushiguro is also part of the chat. But here's the thing, in this new timeline, the situation changes so much that it's almost funny. Gojo already knows Toji's gonna be hired by the Time Vessel Association, which instantly makes Toji a non-factor. I mean, think about it. What if Toji tries pulling the same move he did in the main story, sneaking up and stabbing Gojo? How does that even work this time? From the very beginning, Gojo's infinity would be active 24/7. On top of that, his brain would always be in perfect condition. So even if Toji waits for days looking for the perfect opening, it wouldn't matter. He'd never actually be able to touch Gojo in the first place, because infinity simply wouldn't let him, and it only gets worse for Toji from there. Gojo can take him out in any number of ways. I mean, if Gojo already knows how to keep infinity active 24/7 thanks to his memories, then he also already has mastery over reverse curse technique. And if he has RCT, that means he can use red. If he can use red, then hollow purple's on the table too, along with unlimited void. Now, obviously, there's no real need to bring up unlimited void against someone with zero cursed energy. So I'm sure the moment Toji fails to stab him, Gojo just erases him with a hollow purple and calls it a day. Now, you might be wondering, but couldn't Toji still get through infinity with Inverted Spear of Heaven? Well, not really. The only reason that worked in the main story is because Gojo was completely exhausted and caught off guard. That's why Toji waited until that exact moment to strike. But in this timeline, both the Limitless and the Six Eyes are in perfect condition at all times, and Gojo has full reverse curse technique mastery from the start. One glance is all it takes for him to understand exactly what Inverted Spear of Heaven is and how it works. That's right, from the moment Toji crosses paths with this version of Gojo, it's already over. And Toji dying before he ever reaches Riko changes everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. If Riko Amanai doesn't die, then Suguro Geto never spirals into depression and resentment toward non-sorcerers. He never massacres a village, and he never becomes the Jujutsu Hitler, which means the events of Jujutsu Kaisen 0 straight up never happen. And if that doesn't happen, then Kenjaku never gets access to Geto's corpse, and never obtains cursed spirit manipulation. Without that ability, the entire merger plan collapses. Remember, Kenjaku needed cursed spirit manipulation to absorb Mahito and gain access to Idol Transfiguration in order to start the culling game. He also needed it to eventually absorb Tengen for the merger. So the bottom line is this: Riko not dying quite literally saves the world. On top of that, Gojo and Geto actually get to fulfill their promise of protecting her and letting her live her life after she chooses not to merge with Tengen. And really, why wouldn't that work? Even if Gojo never reveals that he can already use Hollow Purple or Unlimited Void, he would still stand at the absolute pinnacle of Jujutsu just like in the original timeline. Everyone would know he's the top dog, especially after Toji dies in round 1. Yes, in this world, everyone already knows and fears Gojo Satoru exactly like they should. Of course, that doesn't mean solving the overall plot is going to gonna be easy. I mean, the culling game was 1,000 years in the making, and on top of that, Kenjaku can still somehow take Geto's life and then body hop himself at any point until Yuji eats Sukuna's finger. So it's not like Gojo knowing everything suddenly makes him better at tracking Kenjaku down, which raises the real question: how does he handle the Geto situation? The way I see it, Gojo would ask Geto to go to Africa and meet Miguel, just like he did with Yuta after the events of JJK0. Arranging that would be easy, because as the head of the Gojo clan, Gojo is basically top 1 in the world both in terms of scaling and in terms of influence. As for why Africa? Well, Geto needs a change of pace. Riko's death was one of the final nails in the coffin that pushed him past the point of no return. But even before that, he already felt stuck. And let's be honest, his curse technique is pure misery. Imagine having to swallow puke-flavored cursed spirit balls on a regular basis. I'd turn evil too. If Geto stays in Jujutsu Society, it's only a matter of time before something sets him off and he breaks bad. What he actually needs is distance, and someone chill, like Miguel, to help him cool off and regain some balance. Before we continue, do me a quick favor, guys. We're really close to hitting 100,000 subscribers and getting that silver play button, so if you enjoy the content, hit that subscribe button. It would mean the world to me. For the most part, the world would objectively be a better place compared to the original timeline. Gojo, with his slightly more mature brain, would be able to influence Jujutsu Society much earlier than he did in the original story. He still adopts Megumi, and by the time he brings in Yuta Okotsu, I doubt the higher-ups would be complaining about anything. In fact, there's a pretty good chance Gojo would have already killed a couple of them by then. Now, you may be thinking, why doesn't he just kill all the higher-ups like he does right before his big fight with Sukuna? Simple. That would cause way too much instability. Gojo's real goal was never domination. It was to act as a bridge for the next generation, for Yuji, Megumi, Yuta, Hakari, and everyone else. So, instead of burning the system down completely, the smarter move is control. Remove a few of the most problematic old farts, then keep the rest in line through fear. Eventually, we reach the big day. Yuji eats Sukuna's finger, and Gojo shows up to check it out. In other words, we're now at episode 1 of the main story. Though, considering how Gojo's already fought and died fighting Sukuna, would he still want to test a one-finger Sukuna? Well, it's not like he needed to anyway. Like he says early on in the story, even if Sukuna were to regain all of his fingers, he'd still, I'd win. Besides, it wouldn't hurt to farm some aura in front of your students. So yes, he'll fight and mog one-finger Sukuna just for the love of the game. He'll then have Yuji accepted into Jujutsu High. Instead of an actual death penalty, he'll shut up the higher-ups by proposing that he'll personally resolve the Sukuna problem. And honestly, some of them would probably love that idea. If Gojo somehow dies fighting Sukuna, then their politics won't have to deal with him anymore. Either way, Yuji becomes a student at Jujutsu High, and Gojo, knowing how things play out, understands that not much needs to change at this point, so he lets events unfold naturally. But you can bet on one thing: he's not letting Yuji die during the fearsome Wu mark. The real question is, would the higher-ups even try something that stupid, knowing that this version of Gojo's already made it very clear what happens when you piss him off? Honestly, I'm not sure. At the end of the day, these old farts are just politicians, and they're far from united. All it takes is one of them cutting a quiet, underground deal to have Yuji killed. So how does Gojo make sure nothing goes wrong? It's simple. He stays close. Gojo personally makes sure Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara are never sent on missions above their grade, and he'd be very vocal with anyone who suggests otherwise. Of course, the fearsome Wu mark can still happen, but this time, Gojo goes with his students. He uses the finger bear as a live lesson, showing the kids what a real special grade curse looks like. And this is where the original timeline really breaks. If Yuji doesn't die here, the entire story changes. It means Sukuna never gets to form that binding vow with Yuji. In fact, if Gojo's around, Sukuna doesn't even get to come out at all, which means he also won't get to see Megumi's 10 Shadows technique in action. Next up are the disaster curses. I'm not going to reveal which body Kenjaku is using at this point because I'm saving that for later. But the conversation about bringing Sukuna to their side and sealing Gojo Satoru still happens. And just like in the main timeline, it leads to Jogo personally pulling up on Gojo. Huge mistake. This time around, Gojo already knows what the disaster curses would do in Shibuya, so he's not messing around. Yes, he still brings Yuji Itadori along to teach him about Jujutsu concepts like domain expansions, but that's where the similarities end. Unlike the main story, Gojo makes sure Jogo dies right there. No escaping with his head, and no clutch save from Hanami. But what about the versus Mahito arc? Is there any way Gojo being reborn with all his memories creates a butterfly effect that actually saves Junpei? This one's tricky. As you know, Gojo isn't really around for this arc. Yuji, Nanami, Junpei, and Mahito are the major characters. Fine, we'll throw in Ichichi-san too. But what if I told you that Gojo's actions can still indirectly save Junpei? You see, when Gojo kills Jogo early, it improves Yuji as a Jujutsu sorcerer. In the original story, Yuji was binge-watching movies at this point to feel and control his cursed energy. That part doesn't change. Gojo still has him do it, but this time, Gojo understands that Yuji needs to get stronger faster. Yes, Gojo sucks as a teacher, but simply having Yuji personally experience the power of a disaster-level curse massively sharpens his understanding of cursed energy. And there's another important layer to this. Because there won't be any need for Yuji to be away from school since he's still alive in everyone's mind, Gojo would send him out with backup. The mission to investigate the movie theater and Junpei's school goes to a full team: Nanami, Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara. Now, I'll be honest, things would still go horribly wrong. Unfortunately, there's no saving Junpei's mother unless Yuji himself is reborn with all his memories. That part is unavoidable. But if Yuji can bond with Junpei while Megumi and Nobara investigate what's going on, Mahito never gets the chance to lie to Junpei in the first place. Instead of Mahito getting to him in isolation and convincing him that his bully killed his mother, one of them, Megumi, Yuji, or Nobara, would be around to make sure that never happens. They'd explain to Junpei that yes, what killed his mother was connected to Sukuna's finger, but it wasn't the work of a human, it was done by another cursed spirit. And that context matters. Mahito's entire plan depended on Junpei being alone, emotionally broken, and just susceptible enough to believe that humans are the real monsters. With the team around him, that narrative completely falls apart. When the fighting finally starts, a lot still plays out in a similar way, but with key differences. Yuji would already have a more refined divergent fist than he did in the main story. His attacks would damage Mahito's soul far more severely, forcing Mahito to focus on defense instead of pulling something funny. On top of that, Megumi and Nobara are there as backup, and when Mahito eventually uses his domain expansion, Sukuna won't actually give him a second chance because there's no shared laugh at Yuji's breakdown over Junpei's death. Not to mention, this version of Sukuna would be much more irritable because he doesn't have Megumi's body to look forward to yet. Still, in the end, Mahito manages to survive and escape. But what does change is that Junpei actually survives here, and after hearing what happened from Yuji and the others, Gojo will have Junpei enroll in Jujutsu High as a first-year student. Now let's talk about the Kyoto Goodwill event. For the most part, things still play out the same. I mean, nobody thinks Yuji's dead this time, so the whole surprise return is gone. But the training with Todo and the main event of the exchange still play out more or less the same. But what about when Mahito and the others make their move? In the original story, they put up a Gojo exclusive barrier to sneak in, created a distraction with Hanami, and used the chaos to steal 6 of Sukuna's fingers, along with the 3 death paintings. But this Gojo knows exactly when they're pulling up and how that barrier works. So what happens now? Well, Mahito still manages to survive, but he's forced to flee empty-handed after Gojo kills Hanami on the spot. This is not good at all for the villains. Kenjaku's plans are officially cooked. He doesn't have cursed spirit manipulation, he's already lost 2 of the 4 disaster curses before October 31st, and Mahito has failed to steal the fingers and the death paintings. It's over. Or is it? Without those items, the death paintings arc won't happen, but we already know Kenjaku had Mekamaru hired as an insider agent long before this. So, in this timeline, he simply has Mekamaru steal the fingers and the death paintings himself, instead of Mahito. Mekamaru goes through with it to get his body fixed, and then tries to deal with Kenjaku and Mahito afterward. Unfortunately, that just means Mekamaru dies even earlier than the original story. When he delivers the items and gets his body fixed, Mahito kills him. Ironically, this should make things easier for the curses, since Mekamaru never gets the chance to set up a contingency plan for Gojo's sealing. But honestly, who cares? Because how the hell is Gojo getting sealed now anyway? The death paintings arc goes roughly the same way as it did in the original story. Yuji and Nobara kill 2 of the 3 death paintings, and Megumi defeats a finger bearer using his domain expansion. Then we get to the Shibuya incident, and let me be clear, the Shibuya incident as we know it is impossible in this timeline. It was an insanely well-crafted trap that required Geto's face, Geto's curse technique, and near-perfect manipulation of Gojo's psychology, and none of those conditions exist anymore. So let's break down why it can't happen. No Geto body and no Geto face means no shock factor to exploit. And even if Kenjaku did somehow manage to take Geto's body, Gojo wouldn't be shocked. Because little does Kenjaku know, Gojo has all his memories now. That forces Kenjaku to cook a completely new plan, and that plan would have to target Gojo's one confirmed weakness, his students. He can't beat Gojo in a straight fight, so his only option is to try and force a no-win scenario. In other words, a simultaneous multi-point crisis. Maybe Megumi gets targeted by the Zenin clan. Maybe Yuta is framed as a rogue sorcerer by the higher-ups. Or maybe Yuji gets kidnapped by Mahito and Kenjaku. But even then, Gojo can handle all 3 of those no problem. He's the only real political authority in the Jujutsu world. So the Zenin clan can't touch Megumi, and the higher-ups can't do anything to Yuta. The only situation that even starts to get tricky is Yuji getting kidnapped. If Mahito and Kenjaku were to feed him multiple fingers at once, and a 15-finger Sukuna came out to to start massacring people, that could get messy. But even then, Sukuna still wouldn't be at a level where he could truly rival Gojo. He can't even maintain control of Yuji for long, and Yuji would eventually take his body back. On top of that, Kenjaku wouldn't risk having a 15-finger Sukuna get liquidated by Gojo, so he'll avoid that option too, which means Yuji won't be taken, at least not yet. Honestly, things look terrible for Kenjaku. He knows that the moment he appears in front of Gojo, he gets neutralized instantly, and until he deals with Gojo, he can't move forward with anything he's been planning for the past 1,000 years. So while Kenjaku would still try something on October 31st, he'll fail. Without the one way to catch Gojo off guard, nothing bad will happen, because Gojo won't be sealed or defeated. If anything, Kenjaku just takes even more L's. Dagon still gets killed, and Choso realizes Yuji's his brother and ends up switching sides like in the original timeline. Alright, now Kenjaku's back is truly against the wall, but a planner of his caliber isn't just gonna fold. Instead, he goes all in on that final contingency plan of using Sukuna. First, Kenjaku personally kidnaps Yuji. I mentioned earlier that I'd eventually reveal the body Kenjaku's using in this timeline, and it's Kaori Itadori's body, Yuji's mother. Kenjaku simply approaches Yuji under some random harmless pretext while looking like some random civilian. He lures Yuji somewhere out of Gojo's reach and then reveals that he's actually his mother. If Kenjaku pulls this off with the same psychological precision he used on Gojo before sealing him in the prison realm, Yuji would suffer a mental collapse similar to what Megami experiences right before Sukuna takes over his body. Now, I don't think that alone would be enough to shatter Yuji's will to the point where Sukuna instantly takes control. But Kenjaku didn't spend his entire existence winging this. He must have had countless plans built around using Yuji as Sukuna's vessel, because that's literally the only reason he gave birth to Yuji in the first place. Plus, because Kenjaku and Yuji are blood related, and Sukuna and Yuji are also blood related, Kenjaku would be able to make some kind of binding vow that involves Yuji's body to Sukuna as a vessel. The more you think about it, the more it lines up. After all, as I just said, Yuji was born to be Sukuna's vessel. And after Sukuna takes over Yuji, Kenjaku sits down with him to discuss a plan to take down Gojo Satoru. The new plan would be to use culling game to keep Gojo and the others occupied long enough for Sukuna to regain his former strength and enough power to kill Gojo. But how does Kenjaku even pull off a new culling game without cursed spirit manipulation and idol transfiguration? In the original story, Kenjaku uses cursed spirit manipulation to turn Mahito into a ball and gain a one-time use of idol transfiguration. He then uses that technique on Tengen's barrier to kickstart the culling game by remotely altering the souls of the people he had marked. But in this timeline, he forms a binding vow with Mahito, and Mahito would absolutely go along with it because no one would be more thrilled than Mahito by Kenjaku's vision of humanity's evolution, especially when that evolution revolves around optimizing cursed energy. Mahito then uses idol transfiguration himself to start the culling game. The players of the game and their numbers stay the same, but this time Gojo's also one of the players. Now we know from the original story that Kenjaku wants to use the culling game to generate dense, high-quality cursed energy to realize his ultimate goal of starting the merger after absorbing Tengen. But for that to happen, he first needs to take over Geto's body and gain cursed spirit manipulation. And with Gojo still around, that's simply not happening. So Kenjaku's first real step toward his endgame is to have Sukuna kill Gojo so he won't get in his way of taking over Geto's body. So the culling game is now a race to get the remaining fingers and restore Sukuna to his former strength. And for that to happen, Megami is needed. Now in the original story, Kenjaku wasn't present when Sukuna first took an interest in Megami, but he knows the history. He knows that, in the past, a 10 Shadows user and a 6 Eyes plus Limitless user killed each other. He knows that the only thing shown to truly counter Gojo is the 10 Shadows. Yes, exactly. Gojo Satoru is the pinnacle. There's no known technique that can reliably defeat him, but history shows the 10 Shadows is the one exception. So Kenjaku uses Sumiki, whose body is taken over by Yorozu, to break Megami's spirit, and have Sukuna transfer over to Megami, and then have Sukuna tame Maharaga so he's finally ready to fight Gojo. Meanwhile, the culling game is resolved by Yuta, who returns in time for the final battle, alongside Gojo himself and Maki. And yes, Maki still pulls in the Tachihana clan, because while the Zenin clan wasn't acting as recklessly as it did after Gojo was sealed in the original story, Mai still sacrifices herself for Maki. That loss triggers the same crash out, and Maki proceeds to completely wipe out the Zenin clan. Chozo and Todo, on the other hand, are bloodlusted, because where is Yuji? And there's one major problem for Kenjaku's side. Sukuna is still only at 19 fingers, and only Gojo knows where the last one is. In the main story, they compensated by having Sukuna eat his own mummy, but that option doesn't exist here. Because while Kenjaku and Mahito were able to start the culling game using idol transfiguration on Tengen's barrier, the barrier itself has not been broken yet, meaning Kenjaku hasn't been able to retrieve the mummy from Tengen. So wait, does that mean Gojo, who's actually stronger this time thanks to his memories, is going to fight a weaker version of Sukuna in the the final battle? When everything's set in motion, Yuji's unconscious and in Kenjaku's possession, while Sukuna's using Megami as his vessel. Gojo thinks back to how things played out in his last life and answers, "Nah, I'd lose." But don't worry, he's only thinking about how it went the previous time. On the day of the fight, Gojo brings the final finger and casually throws it at Sukuna, like how Goku tossed the Senzu Bean at Cell. This shocks the absolute living daylights out of everyone and even catches Sukuna off guard. Sukuna asks why, and Gojo simply says he wants to make things fair, because in his mind, simply having his memories is already too much of an advantage. But nah, Gojo isn't throwing the fight out of stupidity or pride. Another reason he throws the finger is because this is the perfect time to finally deal with the Sukuna problem for good. The fight begins, and at first it plays out much like the original, with Gojo casually toying around. But this Gojo can't be caught off guard. You see, the reason he lost originally was because he never anticipated a dismantle that could bypass the world around him. But this Gojo already knows that's a thing. So when Maharaga adapts and Sukuna fires off a world-cutting slash, Gojo simply reads it with the 6 eyes and dodges it. And since Maharaga's already been one-shotted at this point, Sukuna now has 0 options left to defeat Gojo using the 10 shadows. That leaves Sukuna completely backed into a corner. With no other options left, he's forced to incarnate and reclaim his original Heian-era body for round 2 against Gojo. So how does this actually go? Can a reborn Gojo beat Prime Sukuna? I'll leave that up to you guys. But keep one thing in mind, both of them have already fried their brains, so domain expansion's completely off the table. It'd be a very different fight compared to round 1. Here's how I see it playing out. Even if Gojo loses, Prime Sukuna would be left with less than 10 HP at best. Yuta and the others would then swoop in to finish him off and handle Kenjaku afterward. But if Gojo wins, he handles Kenjaku himself, reforms Jujutsu Society, and leads the next generation for decades. In fact, it goes even further than that. Even when the events of the Modulus sequel happen, Gojo would still be around and still be the strongest. Think about it. Kashimo is active as an old man, and Naobita was moving faster than sound in his 70s. And Gojo's built different from literally everyone. I can easily see him staying active past 100 years old, especially since his cursed energy efficiency and reverse curse technique would keep both his body and brain in perfect condition. That means he could personally deal with the alien conflict himself. And while everyone else they know eventually dies out, Gojo will have Yuji, and Yuji will have Gojo. Oh, and wait, Yuji would have Chozo too in this timeline because there's no reason for him to die in the final battle. I also don't see Todo going anywhere either. Bro's easily living to 100. But what do you think? Is this really how things would play out if Gojo was reborn with all his memories? And how do you think a fight between reborn Gojo and Prime Heian-era Sukuna in his original body would actually end? And if you made it this far, click on this next video where I break down all 6 special grade sorcerers in Jujutsu Kaisen.